You know, usually when we talk about making a choice, like a real consequential, highly critical choice, there is this baseline expectation of precision.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
It feels like engineering, right? Like if you break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, the doctor points to the film and says, there is the exact problem and here's the exact solution.
Right, because it's a closed system.
Yeah.
I mean, the variables are limited, the diagnosis is totally visible, and, well, the remedy is standard. We crave that kind of binary clarity, especially when the stakes are high.
Exactly. But then you step into the world of corporate strategic management and suddenly that x-ray machine is just entirely useless.
Yeah. Completely obsolete.
We're looking at a decision-making landscape that is incredibly murky. I mean, you're trying to diagnose the health of a massive multinational corporation, predict the future of global markets, and choose a path forward when there are practically infinite possibilities.
And 1,000 overlapping variables. Yeah, it is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. There's no single jagged line to fix here.
Right. You're dealing with shifting economic realities, internal corporate politics, competitive blind spots, and honestly, the terrifying reality that your current cash flow might just be masking a terminal, long-term structural failure.
Which brings us directly to you, the listener, because we know exactly who you are today, and we know exactly what you are preparing for.
We do.
You are an MBA student staring down a massive, high-stakes exam on strategic management. You've got textbooks stacked up. You're drowning in a sea of analytical matrices, and it probably feels, well, completely overwhelming right now.
It's a lot. It is a lot of material.
But take a breath, because today we're going to make these core concepts stick in your memory. We're doing a very specific, highly targeted deep dive into your chapter notes.
Yeah, because strategic choice isn't just about guessing. It's not, a CEO looking out a top floor window and going with a gut feeling. It is a rigorous, deeply analytical framework designed to turn all of that chaos into a defensible mathematical roadmap. And we are going to deconstruct the mechanics of how that actually happens. Our mission today is to get you thoroughly prepared for the exact topics dominating your syllabus.
We've got a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. We're going to conquer the strategic choice process, we'll master the nuances of industry analysis, and we are going to spend a massive amount of time deconstructing corporate portfolio analysis, like how to mathematically balance a corporation and the specific display models you need to map it all out.
But before we jump in, we do need to make one really crucial clarification based on the specific limits of your source text for this exam.
Oh, right. The McKinsey caveat.
Exactly. So we know you were probably eager to review the famous McKinsey DESINES model. It's a staple in MBA programs. But, and this is important, the specific chapter notes provided for today's deep dive only mention McKinsey in the context of co-developing the GE matrix.
Right.
So, to stay strictly factual to what is actually on your page, we are going to focus deeply on McKinsey's contribution to that GE matrix and the other portfolio models. We want to make absolutely sure you master what is actually going to be on this specific exam.
Keep it focused. I love it. Okay, so let's get into it. The foundational element here, like the very first hurdle a strategist faces, is simply figuring out where the options even come from.
Yeah.
But the text leans heavily on this framework provided by Gluck and Zhao.
Right. Gluck and Zhao, they define strategic choice as the decision to select, from among the alternatives considered, the strategy which will best meet the enterprise objectives.
Okay.
But the really critical piece of that definition is the phrase, from among the alternatives considered.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because a CEO doesn't just, wake up from a dream and announce, we are pivoting our entire global supply chain into smartphone manufacturing today.
Right, that would be insane.
Exactly. Alternatives don't just materialize out of thin air. They're derived from the firm's present strategies, their historical mission, and a massive amount of filtering. And Gluck and Zhao map this out as a 4-step decision-making process.
And step 1 is all about brutal, unforgiving limitation. It's focusing on a few alternatives. Because, the human brain, and by extension a corporate board, cannot analyze an infinite number of options.
You'd just be paralyzed.
Exactly. If you try to run a full financial model on every conceivable business move, the market will pass you by while you're still staring at spreadsheets. You have to narrow the field.
And the text provides 2 vital, rigorous tools for this initial filtering, right?
It does. The first is gap analysis.
Gap analysis. Okay, this is fascinating to me because it forces a company to look at its own mortality. I like to think about it like a high-stakes navigation problem. Like, say a corporation sets an objective for a future period, usually 3 to 5 years out.
Yeah, it's a standard strategic window.
Right. So let's say a legacy automaker decides they need to be generating, I don't know, $10 billion in pure EV revenue by 2030 just to survive.
Okay, good example.
Then they look at their current speed, they project their existing manufacturing capacity, their current sales trajectory, and their R&D pipeline forward.
And very often they realize that their current trajectory is going to leave them billions of dollars short of that survival objective. That distance, the space between where they mathematically will be and where they critically need to be, is the gap.
Right. So any alternative strategy that gets proposed in the boardroom has to explicitly close that gap.
It has to.
Like if an executive proposes an alternative, say, hey, let's launch a new line of gas-guzzling luxury SUVs, it might be highly profitable in the short term, but if it doesn't close the 5-year EV revenue gap, it gets thrown out immediately.
You don't even bother analyzing it further. Gap analysis is a ruthless filter. It isolates the strategic conversation.
And then there's the second tool in step 1.
Right. Business definition. Because before you can evaluate a new direction, you have to strictly define who you actually are.
Which sounds so basic, but it's not.
No, it's really not. The text frames business definition around 3 deceptively simple questions. Who's being satisfied? What is being satisfied? And how is the need being satisfied?
I always find these questions sound almost too philosophical for a boardroom. Who, what, how?
They do sound a bit abstract.
Yeah.
But the text uses this great example of an Indian garment-making firm to show how this strictly restricts your alternatives.
Right, yeah.
If the executives answer, who is being satisfied, with a generic, anyone who wears clothes, well, they've failed the exercise.
A vague business definition is essentially a strategic death sentence, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
If the definition is too broad, you can't filter out bad ideas. But if that garment firm defines the who as urban working professionals and the what as the need for affordable, wrinkle-free, climate-appropriate office wear, and the how as through a highly efficient direct-to-consumer digital supply chain.
Wow, okay, the boundaries are suddenly made of concrete.
Exactly. You aren't going to entertain a pitch to manufacture heavy-duty winter mountaineering gear because it violently violates the business definition.
Right, right. So gap analysis and business definition act as, like, the twin bouncers at the door of the boardroom. They keep the innumerable, paralyzing options out, leaving you with just a manageable, focused list of workable alternatives.
Which brings us to step 2, considering the selection factors. Once you have your workable alternatives, you have to subject them to a trial. Selection factors are the specific criteria against which these surviving strategies are evaluated.
And the text mandates that these factors have to be divided into 2 distinct categories, right?
Yes. Objective factors and subjective factors.
Okay, so objective factors, those are the hard data points. The text refers to these as rational, normative, or prescriptive factors.
This is the realm of the spreadsheets. It's the hard math of market share percentages, calculated profit margins, and the quantitative models we're going to dive into later, like the BCG or GE matrices.
But what's fascinating here is that the text explicitly refuses to let objective data stand alone.
Yeah, that's a huge point for the exam.
Because in a modern MBA environment, it is incredibly tempting to believe that if the math works, the decision is made. Boom, done. But step 2 forces the strategist to pair the objective data with subjective factors.
And those are based entirely on personal judgment. They are descriptive. They evaluate concepts like cultural consistency, political feasibility, and executive intuition.
This is where strategy becomes an art rather than just a calculation. I mean, let's say the objective factors, the hard math, prove that acquiring a fiercely competitive rival will increase market share by 40% and streamline the supply chain.
The spreadsheet says, buy them immediately.
Exactly. But the subjective factors require the CEO to look at the reality on the ground. Like, what if the corporate cultures are so violently opposed that the engineering teams will literally refuse to work together?
Then the merger would be mathematically brilliant, but practically catastrophic. I mean, human ego, legacy corporate culture, unquantifiable internal friction, all of that can destroy a perfectly calculated strategy. You just cannot remove the human element from strategic choice.
Which flows perfectly into step 3, evaluating the alternatives. Because you don't just, like, stack the objective math on one side of the desk and the subjective fears on the other.
No, you have to actively synthesize them. You're weighing the pros and cons through a highly structured lens, examining how each alternative, filtered through both data and human reality, serves the ultimate organizational objectives.
And once that evaluation is complete, the process culminates in step 4.
Right. Making the choice, the evaluation is done, the debate is over, and top management actually has to pull the trigger. One or more strategies are definitively chosen for implementation.
But there is a massive caveat in step 4 that the text highlights, and MBA listener, pay attention here. We don't just pick a path, we also have to pack a parachute.
I love that phrasing. Yeah, the formulation of contingency strategies. The text insists that choosing a strategy requires simultaneously acknowledging that the assumptions supporting it might completely collapse.
Right.
Contingency planning is developed concurrently with the primary choice to meet eventualities that are outside the firm's control. We'll explore the mechanics of how and when to deploy those later, but the structural point is that they are built right here at the exact moment of choice.
Okay, so to execute all 4 of these steps effectively, especially the evaluation phase, you have to understand the actual environment your corporation is operating in. Your internal math means nothing if you don't understand the external battlefield.
Absolutely.
Which transitions us into the critical domain of industry analysis. And here, the text draws a very strict, uncompromising boundary between the macro environment and the industry environment.
It does. The purpose of industry analysis is specifically to assess the strengths and weaknesses of a firm relative to its immediate competitors, highlighting the structural realities of that specific space.
Now, the macro environment is defined as being common to all industries, and the text argues it only remotely affects the specific industry.
Yes.
Let me challenge that on behalf of our listener, because on the surface, that sounds a little counterintuitive. I mean, if a massive global recession hits, a purely macro event, doesn't that fundamentally alter the strategy of every single corporation on Earth? Why does the text minimize the macro environment in this specific analytical stage?
Well, so it doesn't minimize the macro environment's existence. It categorizes its utility for a competitive strategy.
Yeah.
Think of the macro environment as the weather.
Okay, the weather.
Yeah, a global recession, a spike in global inflation. That is a massive thunderstorm. It is raining on absolutely everyone. But the industry environment is your specific terrain. So if a torrential downpour hits, are you driving an armored truck on a paved, elevated highway, or are you driving a sports car in a muddy, low-lying ditch?
Oh, wow. Okay, so the weather is identical for both drivers, but the structural terrain dictates entirely different survival strategies.
Precisely. If you're operating in the luxury yacht industry, which is a highly discretionary, capital-intensive terrain, a recession hits you catastrophically.
Wow.
But if you're operating in the discount grocery industry, that exact same macro weather might actually drive consumers to your stores, right? It could increase your margins.
Right.
So analyzing the macro weather doesn't tell you how to win a price war in the discount grocery aisle. Only analyzing the specific industry terrain can do that.
That makes so much sense. And the text lays out 7 distinct, interconnected reasons why understanding this specific industry terrain is an absolute strategic imperative.
It does.
Rather than just, memorizing a list for the exam, let's explore how these reasons actually compound on one another in the real world. So first, as we just discussed, industry-related factors simply have a more immediate, direct impact on the firm than general environmental shifts.
Right. And that direct impact is largely determined by the second reason, an industry's dominant economic characteristics.
Physics of the business.
Exactly. A strategist has to understand the fundamental physics of the business they are in. Are you in semiconductor manufacturing, which requires investing tens of billions of dollars in fabrication plants before you sell a single microchip? Or are you in software as a service, where the barriers to entry are literally just a few laptops and some cloud server space?
The economic reality dictates the scale of risk and the speed of potential movement.
Yes, which directly informs the third reason, revealing the industry's overall attractiveness and prospects for growth. Because some terrains are just fundamentally hostile, no matter how brilliant your management team is.
Right, like if you're the world's most innovative, cost-efficient manufacturer of standalone GPS dashboard devices, in a world where every single smartphone has free navigation.
Exactly. Your industry attractiveness is plunging towards zero. A brilliant strategy in a dying industry is still a dying strategy.
So true.
To evaluate that attractiveness, you move to the fourth reason, mapping the current realities. A firm has to identify the exact size of the industry, the specific product offerings available, the relative volumes moving through the market, and the forces that dictate competitive pressure.
You can't outmaneuver the enemy if you don't know the exact dimensions of the chessboard.
Which leads right into the fifth reason. Industry analysis forces a relentless focus on competitors. Strategy is not a solitary exercise.
Right, you are attempting to capture market share from other highly intelligent, well-funded executives who are actively trying to destroy you.
It's a battle. And understanding your competitor's capacity allows you to identify the sixth and perhaps most vital reason, determining key success factors, or KSFs.
Okay, KSFs, break that down for us.
Every industry has a pressure point. In the commercial airline industry, a key success factor is brutal, relentless logistical efficiency and fuel cost management. In the pharmaceutical industry, a key success factor is long-term R&D patience and patent acquisition. If you analyze the industry poorly and optimize your airline for R&D innovation while completely ignoring fuel costs, you're going to go bankrupt within a year.
You have to know what game you are actually playing.
Exactly. And finally, the seventh reason synthesizes all of this. A thorough, cold-blooded understanding of the industry provides the foundation for thinking about which strategies are actually viable for the firm. It tells you what moves are legal, possible, and survivable on your specific terrain.
But, this assumes a relatively simple corporate structure. We've mapped the industry, we've filtered our alternatives, but here is where the complexity really multiplies for our MBA listener. What happens when your corporation is not just playing on one chessboard?
Yeah, what happens when you are a massive conglomerate?
Right. You don't just sell one product. You have a division making medical imaging machines, another division selling consumer credit cards, and a third division manufacturing jet engines.
And this is the reality for almost every major corporation facing strategic choices today. They do not have a single product, they have a portfolio.
The portfolio.
Yes, and the text makes it explicitly clear that a firm dependent on a single product or a single customer is operating under an unacceptable level of existential risk.
Because if that single product becomes obsolete, or that single massive client decides to switch vendors, your entire corporation just evaporates overnight. There is zero safety net.
Therefore, top management has to view the corporation as a diverse portfolio of business units that must be rigorously managed for the best possible returns. And managing a portfolio introduces a profound strategic tension, balancing products that are in wildly different stages of their life cycle.
It's like an ecosystem. If you look at a massive tech conglomerate, they have mature software divisions that haven't really changed much in a decade, but they generate billions in reliable subscription revenue.
Right.
Simultaneously, they have experimental AI divisions that are burning through hundreds of millions of dollars without generating a single cent of profit.
And the text notes that organizations cannot risk having all their products at the same stage of development. If your entire portfolio consists of brand new, experimental ventures, you have zero reliable income to keep the lights on.
You're just burning cash.
Exactly. Conversely, if your entire portfolio consists of aging, mature products, you are generating cash today, but you have fundamentally mortgaged your future. When those old products finally die, the company dies with them.
This brings us to the core conceptual pillar of the exam notes: balancing the portfolio. The overriding goal of corporate strategy at the highest level is to curate a portfolio that expertly balances low-risk, dull-growth entities with high-risk, high-potential entities.
Imbalance is a ticking time bomb, and it manifests in two equally fatal extremes.
Okay, what's the first extreme?
The first extreme is a portfolio generating excessive cash, but with too few growth opportunities to invest in. You have billions sitting in corporate treasuries, but your existing product lines are aging out of relevance, and you have no internal innovation to fund. The market will eventually view you as a dying utility.
Okay, and the second extreme?
It's the exact opposite, a portfolio with a massive deficit of cash generation compared to the growth requirements of its businesses. You have a dozen brilliant world-changing product ideas in the pipeline, but you don't have a single mature, boring product paying the electric bill.
So you suffer bankruptcy by success. You starve to death before your brilliant ideas can even reach the market.
Precisely. To actively manage and prevent these extremes, the text outlines 4 fundamental pillars of a balanced portfolio. Strategists have to evaluate the whole basket across these 4 dimensions.
All right, let's walk through them. Pillar 1.
The first pillar is profitability.
Now, the objective here isn't that every single unit must be profitable, right? Because that feels like a rookie mistake.
It absolutely is. The aim of portfolio analysis is to maintain the overall profitability of the corporation. It's a mathematical balancing act. It is perfectly acceptable, in fact it is often required, for a highly experimental research division to operate at a staggering loss.
Provided that the flagship consumer product division is generating enough pure profit to absorb that loss and still deliver dividends to shareholders.
Exactly. Profitability is a corporate-level metric,
Yeah.
not just a unit-level metric.
Got it. Okay, moving to the second pillar, cash flow. And we need to make a very strict distinction here between profit and cash flow because they are not synonyms.
Oh, this trips up a lot of students. A rapidly expanding business unit can be wildly profitable on paper. They are selling units at a huge margin, but their cash flow might be deeply negative.
Wait, really? How does that work?
Because to sustain that massive growth rate, they have to constantly build new factories, hire thousands of new employees, and pour money into aggressive global marketing. Growth is a phenomenally expensive condition.
It just devours cash.
It does. On the flip side, a mature, stagnant business might have shrinking profit margins due to price competition, but because they haven't needed to build a new factory in 10 years, their operations generate massive, consistent net cash.
So portfolio analysis must orchestrate these units so that the mature cash generators perfectly fund the rapidly growing cash consumers.
You nailed it. Which brings us to the third pillar, growth itself. This is rooted in the inescapable law of business physics, the product life cycle. Every single product will go through introduction, growth, maturity, and eventually decline. Nothing sells forever.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this pillar is really about acknowledging corporate mortality.
It is.
And here's where it gets really interesting. I want the listener to key in on this specific phrase from the text. Are you ready? Extended corporate immortality.
It is such a profound, almost philosophical concept buried inside a textbook on corporate strategy.
It really is. I mean, if a company relies on one product, it is mortal. When the product enters the decline stage, the company faces an existential crisis. And the terrifying reality is that by the time you clearly recognize your only product is dying, it is almost always too late to invent, test, and scale a brand new product to replace it.
The time lag will kill you. You literally starve while waiting for the new crops to grow.
Therefore, balancing the portfolio across the growth pillar implies that by deliberately staggering different businesses at different stages of their life cycles, the overarching corporate entity achieves stability.
Exactly. The individual products, like the individual cells of an organism, will inevitably age, mature, and die. But because you constantly have new products being birthed and nurtured to replace them, the overarching corporate entity lives forever. Extended corporate immortality.
It's the ultimate goal. But to survive long enough to achieve that immortality, you have to master the fourth and final pillar, risk.
Right. Portfolio analysis is inherently a risk reduction mechanism. Economic trends, geopolitical shocks, and market forces will constantly assault the firm. The strategic aim is to curate a diverse set of businesses that react differently, or preferably, inversely, to those exact same macro forces.
So think about a massive conglomerate that owns, say, a huge commercial real estate firm and an enterprise software company specializing in remote work infrastructure.
Perfect example.
If a global event forces everyone back into offices, the real estate division prints money while the software division struggles. But if a crisis forces everyone to work from home, the real estate division bleeds cash. But the software division's revenue skyrockets.
The conglomerate itself is insulated. The overall financial performance remains smooth and stable.
So we understand the four pillars: profitability, cash flow, growth, and risk. But how does top management actually visualize this ecosystem? A CEO cannot simply hold the financial and strategic intricacies of 40 different global business units in their head.
They need a map.
They need a map.
They map it out using what the text refers to as display matrices. And listener, this is the absolute heart of your exam prep. These matrices are the visual language of corporate strategy.
Let's get into it.
Display matrices are elegant visual frameworks. They plot different strategic business units, SBUs, as a series of investments on a graph. This allows the executive team to instantly characterize their portfolio, spot the imbalances, identify the cash drains, and make the structural decisions required to achieve that extended immortality.
And the granddaddy of them all, the foundational model from the 1970s that completely revolutionized corporate strategy, is the BCG matrix.
Developed by the Boston Consultancy Group and frequently referred to in the text as the growth share matrix, it remains the most famous, most utilized, and honestly the simplest visual tool to describe a corporation's portfolio.
The entire premise of the BCG matrix is built on the cash flow tension we just discussed, right?
Yeah.
Like a long-term survivor needs both high-growth products that consume cash and low-growth products that generate excess cash. It is a two-dimensional grid.
Yes. Let's construct this matrix mentally, step by step. Imagine a standard graph. The horizontal axis, the x-axis, represents relative market share. The vertical axis, the y-axis, represents market growth rate.
Okay, we need to slow down and define the math here, because relative market share is not just your percentage of the total market. The exam will definitely test this calculation. How does the text define it?
Good catch. Relative market share is defined as the ratio of the market share of your specific strategic business unit divided by the market share of the largest competitor in that specific market, the market leader.
Which mathematically means that if a firm has a relative market share of exactly 1.0, they are tied for the market lead.
Correct.
Let's walk through the specific numerical example provided in the text so the listener can lock down the math. Suppose we're looking at a market with three major businesses. Business A holds a 10% market share, Business B holds 20%, and Business C is the dominant player with a 60% share.
Right. To plot Business A on the x-axis, we calculate its relative market share. We take A's share, which is 10, and divide it by the market leader's share, which is Business C at 60. So 10 divided by 60 equals 16. That fraction, 16, is Business A's relative market share.
Now, what about the market leader, Business C? Their share is 60. The rule is you divide by your largest competitor. For Business C, the largest competitor is Business B at 20. So 60 divided by 20 equals 3. Business C's relative market share is 3.
Exactly. And why does the BCG matrix insist on this specific relative calculation instead of just using raw percentages? Because relative market share is a proxy for the firm's structural capacity to generate cash.
Oh, that makes sense.
The foundational assumption of the model is that if a business unit enjoys a high relative market share compared to its rivals, it inherently possesses economies of scale, superior experience curve benefits, and significantly higher profit margins. The larger you are relative to your rival, the cheaper it is for you to produce the next unit.
Okay, so that establishes our x-axis position. The y-axis is market growth rate. This one is much more straightforward, I think. It's just the percentage by which total sales in that particular market are expanding or contracting year over year.
Yep. A high growth rate on the y-axis indicates a dynamic, expanding market. The pie is getting bigger. This provides massive opportunities to capture new customers without necessarily having to steal them from rivals. However, capturing that new growth requires aggressive, continuous investment.
Conversely, a low market growth rate means the market is stagnant or mature. The pie is a fixed size. If you want a bigger slice, you have to engage in brutal trench warfare, usually by slashing your prices to steal a competitor's customer, which of course destroys your profit margins. Pouring investment capital into a low-growth market is generally a terrible strategic choice.
So how does a strategist actually build this physical map for a boardroom presentation? The text provides a rigorous 5-step procedure. Step 1 is isolation. You must strictly classify the company's myriad activities into discrete strategic business units, or SBUs. You can't map a muddled corporate structure.
Right. Step 2, you determine the overall growth rate of the specific market each SBU operates in, and you plot that coordinate on the y-axis.
Step 3 requires digging into the balance sheet. You compile the total assets employed by the company in each SBU to understand how much corporate wealth is tied up in each division relative to the whole company.
Then step 4 is the calculation we just mastered. Estimating the relative market share for each SBU against its largest rival, and plotting that coordinate on the x-axis.
And step 5 is where the magic happens. You plot the intersection of the x and y coordinates on the matrix. But you don't just draw a little dot. The visual impact of the BCG matrix relies on drawing a circle, a bubble, where the size of the bubble represents the total sales volume of that SBU.
And the text provides a specific mathematical formula for drawing these bubbles, right? 1R equals P SEEI ETR 222.
Let's translate that algebra for the listener. The lowercase r is the radius of the circle you are going to draw on the presentation slide. The capital R represents the total aggregate sales of the entire corporation across all divisions. And the lowercase p is the crucial variable. It represents the sales of this specific business unit expressed as a percentage of the corporation's total sales.
This creates an immediate, visceral visual hierarchy. I mean, a flagship division that brings in 60% of corporate revenue will dominate the map as a massive circle, while an experimental new software unit will appear as a tiny pinpoint.
When top management looks at the completed matrix, they instantly see where their revenue is concentrated and, more importantly, what grid sector that revenue lives in.
And this brings us to the most famous nomenclature in modern business. When you draw the grid lines dividing the matrix into high and low growth and high and low relative market share, you create 4 distinct quadrants. Each quadrant dictates a fundamentally different strategic reality.
And the text cautions heavily against trying to manipulate the definitions just to shift your pet project into a favorable quadrant. Honest diagnosis is required.
Let's deconstruct these 4 categories.
Category 1, stars. These are the SBUs plotted in the high-growth, high-market share quadrant.
Stars are the darlings of the corporate portfolio. They hold a dominant leading market share in a market that is exploding in size. They have tremendous potential and are positioned to become the long-term cornerstone of the corporation's future revenue.
But, and there's always a but, the internal reality of managing a star is incredibly stressful. Because the market is growing so rapidly, stars possess a ravenous, insatiable hunger for cash. They must constantly build new manufacturing facilities, aggressively expand international supply chains, and heavily fund R&D just to defend their dominant position against rivals trying to capture the expanding market.
The critical tension with stars, and listener, this is a massive point for the exam, is that despite their high market share and economies of scale, they are often net cash users. They are growing so aggressively that their massive internal revenue is simply not enough to fund their own required expansion.
So if the star is burning through cash, where does the corporation get the money to feed it? That brings us to category 2, cash cows, plotted in the low-growth, high-market share quadrant.
Cash cows are the unglamorous, highly resentful workhorses of the corporation. These are product lines that absolutely dominate their industry, but the industry itself is mature, stagnant, and no longer growing.
Right. Because the market isn't growing, the cash cow doesn't need to build new factories every year. Their capital expenditure drops near zero. They just run their highly optimized, heavily scaled operations. As a result, they generate enormous, reliable mountains of net cash.
The overarching strategy of the BCG matrix is basically a wealth transfer. The corporation ruthlessly extracts the excess cash generated by the cash cows and funnels it across the boardroom to feed the starving stars.
You can imagine the internal corporate politics this creates. The manager of the cash cow division is delivering massive profits every quarter, but their bonuses are capped and their budget is slashed, specifically so the CEO can give all their hard-earned money to the manager of the star division.
It requires immense leadership to manage that resentment. And the text issues a stark warning here. If you milk the cash cow too aggressively, if you strip it of all maintenance capital, it will become dangerously undersupported. It will lose its market share to rivals and devolve into a dog. You have to keep the cow healthy while you drain its resources.
Which brings us to the gamble, category 3, question marks, also referred to in the text as problem children or wildcats. These sit in the high market growth, low relative market share quadrant.
This is the venture capital quadrant. The market is exploding, which means immense capital investment is required just to play the game. But because your relative market share is low, you have no economies of scale, your margins are terrible, and you generate very little cash.
They are called question marks because they force a binary, agonizing choice on management. Their cash needs are astronomical, but their generation is abysmal. They are a massive drain on corporate resources.
Right. So the strategist must decide. Do we believe we can capture market share? If yes, we must pour massive amounts of the cash cow's money into this question mark to strengthen it, hoping it crosses the threshold and becomes a star.
But if management realizes they can never catch the market leader, pouring money into a question mark is corporate suicide. The alternative strategy is to cut your losses and sell the unit off entirely before it drains the corporation dry. It's a high-stakes bet.
And finally, the bottom of the barrel, category 4, dogs. Low market growth, low relative market share.
The dogs have a fundamentally weak competitive position in a stagnant, uninteresting market. They require low investment, but they are never going to be major profit engines. In most scenarios, they just slowly bleed cash as they struggle to hold on to their meager slice of a dying pie.
The standard textbook recommendation for a dog is disposal. Divest it, liquidate the assets, shut it down, and reallocate the few remaining resources to a question mark.
Well, wait, I want to jump in here.
Go for it.
On behalf of our listener, in modern corporate finance, especially with the rise of private equity, is being labeled a dog an automatic death sentence. The text explicitly adds a caveat here that seems crucial.
Ah, yes.
Ah.
It is a vital caveat. The text explicitly states that turnaround is a highly valid strategy for dogs. So what does this all mean? Being labeled a dog isn't an automatic death sentence if you can trim the fat. Like, if a dog is bleeding cash, how does a turnaround actually work?
It works through ruthless, uncompromising operational efficiency. The text notes that many dogs have bounced back to become viable, profitable entities, specifically through aggressive asset and cost reduction. You don't invest new growth capital into a dog that's foolish.
Right.
Instead, you trim every ounce of fat. You consolidate offices, you automate supply chains, you lay off redundant middle management.
You essentially lower the SBU's break-even point so drastically that even with its pathetic market share, it starts generating a small, steady trickle of positive cash flow.
Exactly. You squeeze whatever juice is left in the lemon. And sometimes that turnaround polishing makes the SBU just attractive enough to sell off to a competitor or a private equity firm that specializes in managing stagnant assets.
Okay, so that is the BCG matrix. It is elegant, it is visually striking, and it creates a very clear narrative of cash flow. The cows fund the stars, the executive places selective bets on the question marks, and the dogs are either rehabilitated through cost-cutting or euthanized.
Yep.
But as brilliant as the BCG matrix is, it feels incredibly rigid.
It is a blunt instrument.
Right. It reduces the entire complexity of global business to just two variables, market share and market growth. What if a market isn't growing at all, but it is protected by...
This raises an important question, and it is the precise reason why the evolution of strategic portfolio models didn't stop in Boston. To overcome the glaring limitations of a simple 2x2 grid, General Electric, in the 1970s, realized they needed a more sophisticated tool. And to build it, they sought the help of an external consulting firm.
And listener, this is the GE McKinsey connection we talked about at the top of the show.
Yes. General Electric, with the structural assistance of McKinsey & Company, developed the GE 9-cell matrix, frequently referred to in broader literature as the GE McKinsey multi-factor portfolio matrix.
The operative word there is multi-factor. Instead of relying on two single data points, the GE McKinsey matrix utilizes two broad, heavily weighted composite variables to construct a 3x3 grid. The horizontal axis represents business strength, and the vertical axis represents industry attractiveness.
These are not simple numbers you just pull from a quarterly report. Let's examine what McKinsey and GE decided constituted business strength. It completely abandons the idea that relative market share is the only proxy for power. Business strength includes profit margins. It includes the SBU's ability to compete on product quality, not just price.
It factors in the SBU's intimate knowledge of the customer base. It looks at their technological capacity, like do they own proprietary software that rivals can't match? And vitally, it attempts to measure the caliber of management. You could have a very low market share, but if you possess vastly superior technological capacity and a brilliant executive team, your overall business strength score could still be incredibly high.
The vertical axis, industry attractiveness, undergoes a similar expansion. It is no longer just market growth rate. It certainly includes market size and growth, but it also measures the overall industry profit margin. It evaluates competitive intensity. Is the industry a bloodbath of irrational price wars, or is it a gentleman's club of comfortable protected margins?
It looks at the barrier to entry, the role of economies of scale, and this is a huge leap forward from the BCG matrix. It explicitly includes social, environmental, legal, and human aspects.
Think about the downstream effects of that inclusion. An industry might be experiencing explosive revenue growth, but if looming environmental legislation in Europe is poised to outlaw the industry's core manufacturing process within 3 years, the overall industry attractiveness score plummets.
Wow. Yeah.
The BCG matrix would be entirely blind to that existential legal threat. The GE McKinsey matrix captures it perfectly.
So you calculate these composite scores and you plot your business units on this 3x3 grid. The 9 cells represent varying degrees of industry attractiveness, high, medium, or low, and business strength, strong, average, or weak. Just like the BCG matrix, you draw circles where the area is proportionate to the SBU's sales volume, and the text notes a neat visual trick. You put a pie chart within the circle to represent your specific market share within that volume.
It provides a vastly more nuanced, holistic, and politically aware view of the portfolio.
Oh.
But the GE McKinsey matrix is not the only 9-cell evolution the text requires us to master. We must also explore the directional policy matrix, or the DPM.
Developed by Shell Chemicals in the UK, The DPM also utilizes two broad dimensions, but with slightly different corporate terminology. It measures business sector prospects, categorized as attractive, average, or unattractive, against the company's competitive capabilities, categorized as strong, average, or weak.
What makes the DPM so memorable and so critical for the exam is the highly specific, almost visceral naming convention it assigns to its 9 quadrants. They dictate the exact strategic posture an SBU must adopt.
We need to detail the psychology behind each of these 9 quadrants. Let's start at the absolute bottom, the worst-case scenario, divestment.
In the divestment quadrant, both your competitive capabilities and the overall business prospects are weak. You are a terrible player in a terrible market. These are loss-making units with highly uncertain cash flows. The strategy is uncompromising. The situation is not going to magically improve. Divest immediately. Liquidate the assets and release those trapped resources for alternative profitable use.
Moving slightly up, we find phase withdrawal. Here, the SBU is in an average to weak competitive position, but it sits in a low-growth, fundamentally unattractive business sector. There is zero chance of generating sustainable cash flow.
The strategy here is nuanced. It isn't an immediate fire sale. It is gradual, phased withdrawal. You slowly wind down operations, stop all capital expenditure, and carefully extract whatever cash remains while managing the internal PR and employee panic of a dying division. You pull back slowly and reallocate the funds.
Now, here is a quadrant name I absolutely love because it sounds like a high-stakes casino table. Double or quit.
Oh, it captures the terrifying reality of corporate strategy perfectly.
In the double or quit quadrant, the overarching business prospects are highly attractive. The market is booming, but your company's specific competitive capabilities are weak. You are losing a game that is incredibly lucrative.
The strategy is stark and binary. You cannot maintain the status quo. You must either double down, investing massive, disproportionate amounts of capital and talent to radically upgrade your capabilities and exploit the market prospects. Or, if the corporation cannot afford that massive gamble, you must quit. Exit the SBU immediately. Do not linger and bleed cash in a market where you're structurally outmatched.
Next is the custodial quadrant. Here, both competitive capabilities and business prospects sit in the murky middle, average or unattractive. You aren't great, and the market isn't great.
It's a corporate holding pattern you bear with the situation. The SBU might require a small trickle of support from other divisions just to stay afloat, but the ultimate long-term strategy is usually to package it up and get out so management can focus its attention on more dynamic businesses. It is a zombie division.
Then there's try harder. The business prospects are highly attractive, but your competitive capabilities are only average. You are doing okay in a phenomenal market.
The mandate here is right in the name. The strategy is to actively strengthen your capabilities with a targeted infusion of additional resources. You are close to dominance. Try harder, invest smarter, and push the SBU into a leadership position.
Conversely, we have cash generation. The SBU has incredibly strong competitive capabilities, but the business prospects are entirely unattractive. You are the dominant apex predator, but you live in a shrinking, ugly pond. This sounds exactly like a concept we already covered.
It is the conceptual twin of the BCG's cash cow. Operations are continued strictly to generate maximum cash flows and profits, but absolute discipline is required. No further growth investments should be made due to the fundamentally unattractive nature of the sector's future.
Then we have growth. Strong competitive capabilities in a market with average prospects.
This SBU has a structural advantage. It requires an additional, calculated infusion of funds to help it grow, capture more market share, and dominate the average market even further.
And finally, the absolute crown jewel of the DPM market leadership. Strong competitive capabilities operating in highly attractive business prospects.
This is the star. It is the future of the corporation. It must receive absolute top priority in terms of capital allocation, engineering talent, and executive attention, so the SBU can fiercely defend and retain its market leadership position.
What's fascinating to me, stepping back and looking at the GE matrix and the DPM together, is how they both attempt to solve the fundamental flaw of the BCG matrix, but they introduce a completely new set of problems.
They trade simplicity for accuracy, which raises an important question about the utility of strategic models. The BCG matrix is incredibly easy to calculate. It forces a stark, clear mathematical conversation about cash flow. The GE and DPM matrices are undoubtedly more accurate, accounting for the true complexity of social factors, competitive nuances, and technological shifts.
But they are maddeningly subjective to calculate. How does a CEO assign a strict objective numerical value to management caliber? What is the mathematical weight of societal pressure? It introduces a massive opportunity for internal bias. A division head can easily tweak the subjective scores of their SBU's competitive strength to ensure they land in the try-harder quadrant instead of double or quit.
That is the eternal friction of strategic management. No single model is perfect, which is exactly why a seasoned strategist requires an entire toolkit of models, not just one hammer. And to ensure our MBA listeners' toolkit is fully stocked for this exam, we need to methodically break down the remaining analytical frameworks detailed in the text.
Let's transition to the Arthur D. Little Portfolio Matrix, or the ADL matrix. This one takes a slightly different angle.
The ADL matrix forces a direct correlation between the product life cycle and market power. On the vertical axis, SBUs are classified by their competitive business strength: weak, tenable, favored, strong, or dominant.
And along the horizontal axis, it explicitly maps the 4 stages of the product life cycle we discussed earlier: embryonic, growth, mature, and decline.
This matrix is highly effective because it prevents a company from misdiagnosing a product's potential based solely on its current strength. A dominant product in a decline stage requires a wildly different strategy, likely rapid cash extraction, than a merely tenable product in the embryonic stage, which requires patient, aggressive, venture-style investment.
Next, we dive into a model that swings the pendulum entirely back toward hard math: PIMS, or the profit impact of market strategy.
PIMS is fundamentally different from every other matrix we've discussed. The BCG, GE, and DPM models are conceptual visual frameworks. PIMS is a massive empirical statistical engine. It was originated by General Electric in the 1960s to mathematically determine which specific strategic factors most heavily influence cash flows, investment needs, and overall corporate success.
The methodology is staggering. The Strategic Planning Institute used multidimensional cross-sectional regression studies on the actual historical profitability of more than 2,000 distinct companies.
They derived general laws of business physics based entirely on statistical relationships from past experience. The idea is that you take your company's specific characteristics, plug them into this massive historical database, and the statistical regression tells you the mathematically optimal strategic approach.
It sounds like the ultimate unbiased objective tool, a CEO's dream. But let's push back here, because the text lists several severe critical drawbacks to the PIMS model that are prime material for an exam question.
Indeed. The first major flaw is its foundational assumption. PIMS assumes that short-term profitability is the primary overriding goal of the firm. But modern business history proves that that isn't always true. Look at Amazon in the early 2000s. They aggressively ignored short-term profitability for over a decade, specifically to build an insurmountable infrastructure and market share advantage. PIMS would have told Amazon they were failing.
The second flaw is perhaps even more dangerous. The entire analysis is based on historical data. It relies on what worked in the past. But it is completely blind to future unprecedented changes in the external environment.
It is the strategic equivalent of driving a high-speed sports car by staring exclusively into the rearview mirror. If an entirely new technology emerges like generative AI, the historical regressions of the past 20 years are instantly rendered useless.
And finally, the text notes that PIMS analyzes firms in isolation. It cannot account for internal dependencies or potential synergy within a conglomerate. It completely misses the internal magic of how a cash cow supports a star because it evaluates each unit's statistical profitability separately.
Moving forward, the text introduces the SPACE matrix. This stands for Strategic Position and Action Evaluation. This matrix is unique because instead of just categorizing a product, it dictates the specific strategic posture an organization should adopt.
It's an internal versus external evaluation. It plots internal dimensions, specifically financial strength and competitive advantage, against external dimensions like environmental stability and industry strength. Based on the aggregate scores, a directional vector is drawn on the grid, landing the firm in one of 4 specific behavioral quadrants: aggressive, conservative, defensive, or competitive.
If the vector falls in the aggressive quadrant, the firm is operating from a position of immense power. They have strong internal finances and a stable external environment. The posture dictates using those internal strengths to exploit external opportunities. You pursue aggressive market penetration, rapid product development, and heavy forward integration. You attack the market.
If the vector lands in the conservative quadrant, the environment might be stable, but your competitive advantage isn't dominant. The posture dictates caution. The firm should stay very close to its established core competencies and avoid excessive, high capital risks.
Now, if the vector points to the defensive quadrant, the firm is in critical danger. They have internal weaknesses colliding with an unstable external environment.
And I want to challenge the textbook framing here. Often defensive sounds like just holding the line. But in this matrix, a defensive posture usually means painful retrenchment.
Absolutely. It is not a passive posture. A defensive strategy is an active attempt to survive through drastic measures. It dictates pursuing immediate turnaround strategies, aggressive divestiture of non-core assets, or even strategic bankruptcy and liquidation to protect whatever valuable core remains.
And finally, the competitive quadrant. The environment is highly dynamic and unstable, but the firm has a strong competitive advantage. Here, the firm must follow competitive strategies like forging joint ventures, building strategic alliances, or executing horizontal integration to solidify its footing in the chaotic market.
Which brings us to the final analytical model in our extensive toolkit, the QSPM, the Quantitative Strategic Planning Matrix.
This is a tool designed to allow strategists to evaluate alternative strategies objectively based on previously identified key internal and external success factors. It is a highly structured, rigid, 6-step computational process. Let's walk through the mechanics.
Step 1. The strategist must compile a comprehensive list of the firm's external opportunities and threats, alongside its internal strengths and weaknesses. It essentially imports the data from a classic SWOT analysis into the first column of the matrix.
Step 2. The strategist must assign numerical weights to each of those key factors based on their perceived importance to succeeding in the industry.
Step 3. Identify the specific alternative strategies that the organization wants to evaluate and place them in the top row of the matrix.
So to step 4. Determine the attractiveness scores. These are numerical values that indicate the relative attractiveness of each strategy in mitigating a threat or exploiting an opportunity.
Step 5. Compute the total attractiveness scores. You do this by multiplying the factor weights assigned in Step 2 by the attractiveness scores determined in Step 4.
And finally, Step 6. Compute the sum total attractiveness scores down each strategy column. The strategy with the highest mathematical score is, theoretically, the objectively superior choice.
Now, you just laid out the 6 steps, but I can hear the skepticism in your voice.
I have to laugh at the profound irony of this model. It is literally named the Quantitative Strategic Planning Matrix. It has 6 rigid steps. It involves decimals, weights, multipliers, and sums. It is designed to look like pure, unassailable mathematics. But look closely at step 4.
Determining the attractiveness scores.
Yes. The text explicitly admits that determining these crucial attractiveness scores requires, and I quote, good intuitive judgment. The entire mathematical edifice rests on a foundation of subjective human guessing.
And you just exposed the fatal flaw of the QSPM in practice. A cunning CEO or division head who wants their pet project approved can simply manipulate the intuitive attractiveness scores in Step 4 or tweak the weights in Step 2 to ensure that the final mathematical sum in Step 6 spits out the exact answer they already decided they wanted before the meeting began.
It creates an illusion of quantitative objectivity to launder a subjective decision.
Which validates a core underlying truth about this entire chapter of your syllabus. Knowledge is most valuable when it is deeply understood, not just blindly calculated. All these matrices, the BCG, the multi-factor GE, the DPM, the statistical PIMs, the postural space, and the computational QSPM are simply frameworks. They are scaffolding. They are designed to structure the debate, to organize the data, and to guide human intuition. They are not designed to replace the strategist's judgment.
Okay, so we have run the gauntlet. We have rigorously analyzed the industry terrain. We have filtered our alternatives. We have mathematically balanced the portfolio across profitability, cash flow, growth, and risk using our display matrices. We have debated the subjective factors, and top management has officially made the strategic choice. We have built the perfect, seemingly immortal corporate machine.
But what happens when the real world throws a massive, unforeseen wrench directly into the gears of that machine?
Because no plan survives first contact with reality. This brings us to the final, critical section of the text, contingency strategies.
Strategic choice is, fundamentally, an exercise in making assumptions. We construct our perfect matrices based on the assumption that the market will continue to grow at 5%. We assume inflation will remain flat. We assume our global supply chain will remain uninterrupted. And we assume the regulatory environment will remain stable.
But the text notes with chilling clarity that conditions change drastically. And worse, these changes do not occur in a sequential, orderly fashion, nor do they politely give impending warnings.
They surface suddenly, violently disrupting the corporate trajectory.
Think about the modern global economy. A massive, unexpected labor strike suddenly shuts down your primary semiconductor fabrication plant in Asia. A sudden, catastrophic downturn in the global housing market wipes out consumer discretionary spending overnight. Or a sudden change in government policy instantly makes your core, high-margin product subject to a crippling new tax tariff.
The text paints a very vivid, almost poetic picture of this reality. These sudden discontinuous events leave deep scars on the faces of managers if they're unprepared.
To survive, a true strategist must always keep contingency strategies fully developed and ready for immediate deployment. If the macroeconomic conditions change radically, the primary chosen strategy might have to be discarded altogether in a matter of hours. If the changes are less severe, the strategy might just need rapid, suitable modification. But you cannot be caught flat-footed in the boardroom wondering what to do next.
And the mechanism for managing this is the establishment of trigger points. Firms identify specific, highly measurable trigger points to automatically alert management that a contingency strategy must be pressed into service.
This is such a critical concept. I like to think of contingency planning not just as carrying a life jacket on a sinking boat. Everyone knows you need a life jacket. But true, strategic contingency planning is knowing exactly when the alarm needs to sound for everyone to put them on. The trigger point is the alarm.
If your primary strategy relies on the cost of raw steel remaining under a certain threshold, you set a strict trigger point at a 15% price increase. The moment the global price of steel hits that 15% mark, you do not convene a 2-week executive committee to analyze the situation. The trigger has been pulled. You immediately, reflexively execute contingency plan B, perhaps shifting to alternative composite materials, which you already formulated and stress-tested months in advance.
Because when those alternative plans are already in place, mid-course corrections can be executed smoothly, efficiently, and decisively, rather than in a state of sheer reactive panic.
The text concludes this entire section on strategic choice with a very powerful summary of the strategist's mindset, borrowing heavily from the philosophy of Peter Drucker. Successful managers do not sit passively and wait for the future to happen to them. They actively make the future through proactive planning, advanced preparation, and rigorous contingency mapping.
They introduce original action by aggressively removing present difficulties. They anticipate future problems before they manifest. They willingly change their own internal goals to suit the external realities of the market. They experiment, they take the initiative, and they attempt to actively shape the environment to create a more desirable, survivable future for the corporation.
It is the ultimate test of executive leadership. A strategy that assumes everything will proceed perfectly according to the initial spreadsheet is fundamentally flawed from its inception. True strategic choice explicitly includes the choice of how to survive the unexpected.
Okay, listener, let's take a deep breath. We have covered a massive, dense amount of material today. We have deconstructed the mechanics of corporate survival. Let's run through a rapid synthesis so you can lock this architecture into your memory before you walk into that exam room.
We began by demystifying the strategic choice process, utilizing gap analysis and business definition to ruthlessly filter out infinite possibilities down to a few workable alternatives, and balancing cold, objective data with the messy reality of subjective human judgment.
We then mapped the external battlefield, exploring why the specific structural realities of the industry terrain, the key success factors, the competitive intensity, the economic barriers to entry dictate strategy far more directly than the overarching macro weather.
We tackled the existential necessity of balancing the portfolio. We explored how a corporation must orchestrate profitability, cash flow, growth, and risk across its various divisions to escape the mortality of a single product life cycle and achieve extended corporate immortality.
To visualize that orchestration, we deconstructed the display matrices. We walked through the math of the BCG matrix, exploring the brutal internal politics of funneling cash from the cows to feed the stars, while attempting turnaround surgery on the dogs.
We evolved past the BCG model by exploring the multi-factor GE matrix, remembering to credit McKinsey for their role in designing those composite variables. And we analyzed the stark, high-stakes psychology behind the directional policy matrix quadrants like double or quit.
We rounded out the strategic toolkit by analyzing the product life cycles of the ADL matrix, exposing the historical blind spots of the PIM's statistical regressions, charting the defensive and aggressive postures of the space matrix, and revealing the subjective vulnerabilities hiding inside the QSPM.
And finally, we prepared for the inevitable collapse of our assumptions by establishing trigger points and contingency strategies, ensuring the corporation can pivot before panic sets in. You now possess the complete structural framework, You understand not just what the models are, but why they exist and how they break.
But before we officially sign off and before you close your notes, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought to chew on as you continue your MBA journey.
We have spent this entire deep dive discussing matrices like PIMS, the BCG, and the GE model that rely fundamentally on clearly defined, easily identifiable market boundaries. They require you to know exactly who your competitors are and what industry you belong to. But think about the volatile reality of global business today. We are living in an era being constantly upended by entirely new technologies and unprecedented shifts that blur the lines between industries completely.
The boundaries are entirely vanishing. You have tech companies building automobiles. You have retail giants acting as commercial banks. You have software algorithms replacing medical diagnostics.
Exactly. So the question I leave you to ponder is this. In an environment where the fundamental rules of market share and the very definitions of the industries themselves are being rewritten overnight, how effective can a strategic model built on historical industry definitions truly be? At what point do our perfectly calculated historical matrices stop functioning as lenses that clarify the market and start acting as blinders that hide the real threats?
That is a phenomenal, high-level question. It brings us right back to the very beginning of our conversation. The X-ray machine is broken. You cannot simply look for the clean, jagged line of a broken bone. The landscape of strategic management is murky, it is highly dynamic, and it requires constant active synthesis of mathematical data and ruthless, adaptable human intuition.
The models and matrices we deconstructed today are absolutely essential tools for the exam and for the boardroom, but they are only as effective as the mind that wields them.
To our listener preparing for the big strategic management exam, you've absolutely got this. You now have a deep conversational, mechanical understanding of the theories behind your textbook notes. We wish you the absolute best of luck. But more importantly, we encourage you to step out into the real world, look at the businesses you interact with every single day, and start applying these models in your head. Look at a massive tech conglomerate and try to spot their cash cows. Look at a struggling retailer and identify if they are in phased withdrawal or double or quit.
Once you start seeing the underlying strategic architecture of the market, it changes how you view the world entirely.
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep analyzing the terrain, keep balancing your portfolio, and we will see you next time.